It's about 12:30, and as I said, I would have John Mazzoni from Non-Fungible Domains, and he is in the green room, so to speak, or the digital green room, I guess. We'll close some tabs to make Pat happy here, and let's bring him up and talk about some XGov. John, how you doing today?
Yeah, man. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Well, you guys had a pretty interesting 4-hour spaces. Did you think it would go that long?
No, yeah, definitely not. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about when you get into governance, so I'm not really too surprised it went 4 hours either. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there really was, and when I saw it was 4 hours, I thought, oh, do I really want to try to go through all this thing? And I thought, well, I'll try to get like at least the first hour in, and I ended up listening to pretty much all of it. I think it sounded like people were kind of fading out at the last 20 minutes or so, so I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched or listened to a pretty substantial portion of it. I wonder if you now I kind of like drew out an outline of some of the what I see are like the central conflicts, and like centralization, decentralization is kind of one. Uh how would I put that? I had it in notes and I didn't put my computer out here, but I wonder if you want to summarize like some of the issues that you've had with XGov, and maybe talk about some of your solutions. We can kind of go through them one by one.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't come prepared with like any
Oh, that's okay.
so yeah, I'll just kind of ramble and then cut in if I'm going off track or anything.
Hmm.
Um yeah, so governance in a decentralized environment is not an easy thing. I want to say that first. And
Yeah.
I also want to say that those people at Algorand Foundation working on this and thinking about it, are doing so in good faith. They're not trying to sabotage governance or make governance ineffective. It's just like a really hard topic, I believe. And so that's one
Hmm.
issue I'll say, like just a general issue of governance is
Yeah.
it isn't solved.
Yeah, I guess
Like
I guess that's part of the I guess that's part of like when I drew these conflicts, it's because maybe I can remember some of them. We can go through them because that is sort of the challenge. It's like you have to make trade-offs. There's really no perfect solution here. So one of the things I thought about was representation versus or an inclusivity versus like skin in the game. So right now, I think one of the complaints that I had is like, unless you have like a tremendous amount of Algorand, it doesn't really feel like you have an actual voice in governance. And it seems like the
definitely.
rules kind of control things. But on the other hand, it's like, well, and someone had brought up the idea of inclusivity, and in their case, meaning just like everyone can participate. But the problem is like if the only requirement is to have an Algorand and or have a wallet with like maybe one Algorand, well, that's not really fair to the person who's invested like millions of dollars in Algorand. So that's where these things get really tricky.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's kind of like a lot to unpack there. I firmly agree with you that uh, one algo, one vote to me seems like it's just a plutocracy, right? It's like who
Mhm.
has the greatest stake, and then that person or entity could then just take control of whatever process or
Mhm.
whatever governance vote or whatever. They could sway it dramatically in one way or another. And there are ways to deal with this, like making some minimum quorum of individual users. So and like just for instance, if it requires 1 million algo to pass, then it also requires 10 different users. Or
Right.
just there's some minimum amount of users that have to also vote instead of just stake based.
Mhm.
This is definitely like a you know a workable solution. But what it does is it still gives those with the largest stake like a dramatically outsized say. And so how XGov currently works is kind of similar to this. It was how much you put in governance and then you commit it like to XGov for the year, the rewards from that governance period. So you're kind of like delaying your rewards. Uh, but yeah, it's still fundamentally your votes were a function of how much you had staked. And so this new version of or committed to governance, not staked. This new version will essentially look at how much you have staked in consensus, and that will then determine, the amount of votes you get in XGov. And why I think it's like an unoptimal solution. It's not a terrible solution, but it's not the best solution. Is like, what you always have to ask yourself what you're optimizing for. And like XGov is a funding mechanism. So like, if you're thinking about a funding mechanism, you want to not waste money, and you want it to be like, fast and efficient. And by not wasting money, you are giving more money to those creating value. So that in my mind is what you should optimize for with XGov, is like, how do we efficiently and effectively hand out this money in a decentralized, completely decentralized if possible way. And you mentioned it earlier, like inclusivity versus exclusivity. And inclusivity in my mind is like the complete wrong thing to think about. What you should really think about is credible neutrality, meaning like you set the criteria to become an XGov such that anybody can become an XGov. It just like, you just have to meet certain criteria.
Yeah,
right?
the way I was thinking about it yesterday was anyone can become an XGov, but not everyone can become an XGov. And I think that kind of gets to what I was saying with the skin in the game versus inclusivity, that, yeah, we do want people to have some stake in it. I wonder what you think. This is an idea I had yesterday when I was listening to the spaces. And actually, it's something I thought about before too. Like, what if there's some balance between the two? Like there was a weighting system. So one algo is one algo, but then 10 algo is like 2 algo, or, et cetera, et cetera. So by the time you get to 1 million algo, it's not worth 1 million votes, but it's worth still more than like, the person with like 10 algo or 100 algo.
So the issue with that is it incentivizes breaking up your stake. Like, essentially is what's wrong with that idea. Is that like, if somebody could benefit by breaking their stake up into a bunch of different accounts, then they will.
That's
So
true.
if you try and add some like, function that decreases the amount of votes per algo you're holding, then they'll just distribute it across 1,000 accounts and, optimize to some max,
Right.
voting power.
Well, that's why this stuff is tricky, right? Like there's always a Chesterton fence that you're removing that you might not be aware of. Like that's why
And
this
that's
stuff
the
is
issue. That's the issue. The more complicated that it gets, like, so the more
right.
complicated the system, the more things that then can like be kind of either like a centralizing factor, or, something that complicates the entire picture. Like, just for instance, how XGov works now is there's only like a certain amount of votes possible per session, right? So what this does, you're directly competing with all the other proposals in the epoch, or whatever you want to, in the period. So that's just an example of like, you make some design decision and then it ends up actually impacting like the output. So the simpler you can make the mechanism, the better in game theory, like, because then there's less little things that can kind of impact like how the game ends up being played. But the goal, right, is to effectively allocate and efficiently allocate this capital in a decentralized way. And how you do that is by like qualifying the people that get votes, right? So that's like kind of central to my idea, was like, you need actual experts to be expert governors. Not everybody should be allocating money. And so, yeah, like, how you come up with being an expert, I had 2 different ideas on that. You could handpick a committee and then have some democratic process for like including more people or excluding current people, voting in, voting out kind of setup. That was kind of like unliked.
Yeah, I was gonna say that might have been your most controversial part of the spaces, I think, and probably because, I mean, I guess one could argue that ends up not being very decentralized, right? Which is, I think where you and I might disagree, though, maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced. To me, I see centralization and decentralization as a spectrum, And I think the goal for me with crypto is to kind of move things toward a decentralization, toward the pole, but not all the way. I don't think all the way there is ideal. That's just my opinion. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a broad topic. Like, even when people say
Well, it is, right?
decentralization,
Like, so I mean, but even your idea of like,
generally speaking, I'm like a
yeah.
maxi for decentralization because it's
Mhm.
the hardest thing to actually accomplish. Like, and it's the strongest thing to actually accomplish. Like, if it has any little centralized point, then that point can fail, and then it's like if one little centralized piece could fall and destroy your decentralized system, then it's not very robust.
So
That'd be
to
my take.
to push back on that though, isn't your idea of experts, isn't that somewhat of a centralized idea?
No, I would argue it isn't. I mean, handpicking a committee, that is the centralized act,
Mhm.
in the entire thing. But having a committee of 100 plus individuals, I would say is fairly decentralized. But
Mm. But
to
who's doing
even
I think the person who's doing the picking ends up being the centralizing factor, right?
100%. But if
Mhm.
that person, all that person can do, who I said the Algorand Foundation should be that decider, because they are already in this central role of who, like, they determine what happens with Xgov. So
Mhm.
they need to own that and come up with a system to decentralize it, right? Like, and that's what they're doing right now.
Right.
So it's not really a departure from what's going on. But
That's fair.
then they hand it off to these 115 people and they have no more control. So in my opinion, like, yeah, everything starts centralized. Like Satoshi, it created the first node, right? And yeah, so, and mined the first blocks and all that stuff. Like, he was the only person on the entire network for a long time. So yeah, just like, I don't know, they always start centralized. Somebody has to launch the decentralized protocol, you know. But anyway, there is another way to come up with some criteria for xgovs, and it is to come up with like an ecosystem activity score. Who I created a Medium article on this, and it's pretty short,
Mhm.
but it highlights like the general idea. And it's essentially you add weights to individual actions that you could do on chain, and then you calculate per account their ecosystem activity score. And it's kind of similar to the Gitcoin passport, if anyone's familiar with that, where they're essentially trying to judge what account is a unique human. And so how they do that is through like a variety of you linking your KYC'd exchange counts to their app. And then they score you based on that plus like your account's history. But it's
Mhm.
very little on chain, and it relies extremely heavily on KYC'd exchange counts. I would like a completely on chain way to do it. Everybody
Right.
says that it's bottable if you do it all on chain, but
Mhm.
I firmly like don't believe that, because there are things that have a cost.
Right.
So yeah, it's all about like, if the cost to bot it is very low and the score that you get for it is very high, then it's going to be botted 100%.
Yeah, I thought you had a
But
good point on the
cost is
spaces where
high.
you said, like, if you were doing, if you were doing the transactions, like, yeah, maybe you could create a bot that did all these transactions, but all those transactions happen. You can't fake that. So even if you did it, just like the oranges thing, like it created a bunch of transactions, well, those are real transactions. Like there
Yep.
really was that activity on the chain, and it really led to, revenue for the foundation. Probably not like a ton based on it, but I thought that was a really good point you made on the spaces.
Yeah, transaction fees are like one of the things that you can't fake, right? It's like you
Mhm.
either paid that transaction fee or you didn't, and it didn't go to you, right? It went to the fee sink, and it's like, fully on chain that did not go to you. So there are things that cost money, and you just can't get around. Like, another good example is Algo TVL. Like, you cannot fake Algo in an LP pool, right? It's
Right.
either there or it's not. And
Mhm.
so, like, I just there are some of these things that I don't think are bottable. And if they are bottable, then it's the same that a human could do it. It's like you just need the money. And
Mhm.
how this differs from just based on how much algo you have staked is it shows that you are actually using the ecosystem and have a good understanding of the ecosystem, right? So it's not just counting TVL, it's not just counting your transactions, it's counting the number of apps you've used, the frequency you use the apps. Like you could add all kinds of variables to this that some are bottable, some are not. But then you weight the ones that are bottable the lowest, and you weight the ones that aren't bottable and have the highest cost the highest. And essentially, you could come up with a ecosystem activity score that takes into account more than just the algo you have staked. It gives you like a more full picture of this person and like if they are likely to be expert or not. It's not going to be a perfect science, but
Mhm.
it's going to be better than just saying we're going to give the person with the highest stake the most votes, right?
Right.
And so my whole idea is like you qualify all the xgovs somehow,
Mhm.
whether completely decentralized on-chain activity score or kind of centralized at the start. You just handpick, and
Mhm.
then you create some process to grow. But after that, then you use one person, one voting block like ratio. So you do not just say like, oh, Frugal, you have 1,000 algo, you have 1,000 votes. It's if there's say 100 members of this group of experts,
Mhm.
then everybody gets 1,000 votes each, right? And then you can allocate those 1,000 votes over the proposals that are in front of you. And then at the end, the median is taken of all of the votes, and that is the amount that is allocated to those projects. Sorry, I just wanted to get it all out there.
Yeah, no, I get it. That's a I think that's a pretty good idea, and I like that you brought up gaming the system because that came up a lot yesterday too in the space, or what was it, 2 days ago? I listened to it yesterday anyway. Yeah, that was something that came up, was the idea of gaming the system. That, and I was kind of thinking about this too when I was looking at XGov. Is like, well, couldn't enough people just kind of pool their resources and pass all their various projects? And I think it was you or maybe it was someone else mentioned that you don't even need necessarily that pool of people, that one person could use their own capital to essentially leverage the project for themselves. And I think that's really interesting aspect of xgov. One thing I kind of thought of, I don't know what you think about this idea or how workable it is. I just throw out these ideas, but and maybe it has to become this because eventually, the foundation's not really going to have this money. Is like, what if it just worked like crowdfunding? So if I put in 1,000 algo, I'm buying like a teeny tiny percentage of equity in the company, and I get some kind of return. So if the company goes bust, then I'm going to feel that pain because I lost my 10,000 algo or whatever. But if, I support a project and it does really well, and I know you're going to talk about the ex post facto payments, so you can kind of segue to that once you react to my idea. But like, what do you think about that idea of sort of it having it be kind of like a crowdfunding almost platform?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote like half paper on proactive, like a proactive DAO, how you could set it up, and I honestly think it's like fantastic idea. I call it
Mhm.
proactive DAO, but like yeah, crowdfunding DAO, however you want to brand it. It's the same idea of you're taking
Mhm.
individuals from the community, not the foundation's money, and you are taking the risk personally on these speculative ideas that people pose, right? You're acting as a VC in a sense,
Mhm.
getting pitch decks and judging which ones are worthwhile with your own money.
Right.
And yeah, that's 100% would be my vision for proactive grants.
Mhm.
And how I envisioned it working was kind of like a loan. But you could really structure it in a variety of ways. Like um, equity is one way, but debt is obviously another way. So you could
Oh
give
yeah.
them 100K algo, right, from the DAO, and they launch, they make 100K algo,
Mhm.
and they pay you back 100K algo plus interest, and
Right.
the interest plus the principal is paid out to everybody who contributed proportionally.
They're probably more workable, honestly, than equity. It's probably easier to implement because it's like, oh, you just have to pay this percentage back instead of trying to figure out, well, here's a revenue report and here's your percentage. Yeah, I
It
get
could all
that
be
kinda makes sense.
completely anonymous and decentralized as well, compared to if it's equity, you need somebody's name to like, or an entity to put on the SAFT or the safe or whatever. But yeah, so that's my idea for proactive. But yeah, you segued me perfectly into retroactive, and why I push so hard for that
Mhm.
is because there's all these risks, right? With like if somebody comes in with a proposal for a product that is not built and has no clear revenue path and no product market fit, like you are taking just a wild gamble that this
Right.
thing is going to be successful, and
Yeah,
you're
can we just
using.
pause a second and
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about how crazy it is that that's how it seems like that's how the foundation grants in the early days worked. It was like, it didn't seem like I don't know if they factored that in or not, that if there was any revenue plan, 'cause when some of these things have kind of come out of the wash lately, it's like, well, wait a minute, how did you plan to actually make money? Were you just going to rely on the foundation forever? Because clearly
So
that's not going to happen.
to be fair, like
Mhm.
making revenue shouldn't be like the only thing, right? It should be what is the value created by this? Like, especially when you're thinking of a public good. It's like public goods don't necessarily make revenue, right? Their whole like kind of pitch is more people get value from it than pay for that value, right? So
Sure,
it's
but
like,
then to me, that's like maybe a separate thing, or maybe it just didn't seem like that distinction was made clear because like the stuff with Algo Explorer came out and it was kind of like, well, did you not know that this was going to be the case in the beginning, Foundation? And if you did, like, what expectation did you give them in the beginning? Was there an expectation of revenue?
so
I, 'cause-
I'll give you my take on
yeah,
Algo Explorer. Algo
mhm,
Explorer, 100% a public good, right? And the
sure.
foundation was right in trying to fund them and make sure that they could
Mhm,
stay sustainable and stay alive. But I think there's a point where the public good is starting to be super inefficient, right? And like if there are two roads and one road takes you an hour to get to from point A to B and the other road takes you 10 minutes, right? Like they're going to fund the one that takes you 10 minutes, not an hour. Like all else equal. Why would they spend resources on the one that takes you an hour? Like it's
mhm,
going to cost more, less people use it. The cost benefit is higher for the better quality thing. So in my opinion, that's what played out with my algo. Is like at the beginning, 100% they were public good, smart for funding it, and then their costs crept up as other competitors came in, and that's it's like the foundation was right for cutting them off, but it
right.
was definitely like just a bad PR kind of fumble, I would say. But yeah, like
Mhm.
having a decentralized, retroactive public goods funding mechanism would not fix that necessarily. Like
I guess that would make me really nervous. That would make me if I was the founder of like one of these goods, I'd be like, well, wait a minute. If we're going to build a company, I don't want to, and if we're going to rely on outside funding, I would want to know that that's going to be in perpetuity versus like, I don't know. That just would really make me nervous as a business owner.
there's lots
To
of
do that.
risks, yeah,
Mhm,
in business and like the kind of what field you play in, and like some
mhm,
people actually don't optimize for like making money. Like they want to live a good life, and they want to build cool stuff and like improve the ecosystem, and like so there's these people, all different kinds of people that want different things, and for some people it's just enough to build something great that everybody uses and then get the bare minimum to cover expenses. But then there's other people that like want a fully commercialized thing, or they want to launch a
mhm.
token, make a ton of money, like so yeah, I would just say like different people, and so
I
there's some people
understand.
that just like they believe in open source and they believe in the creating public goods, um, like to benefit everybody,
No, I understand. I understand that, but also like if you're starting a business, you have all these people that are now relying on you to, feed themselves and their families and pay the mortgages and whatnot. And I don't know anything about any of the people's personal situations, but it's just, even if it was, there's no profit motive, like it has to be sustainable, right? And I would be really nervous if I was my sole source of funding or most of it. I don't know. I don't know their full situation, but just from a business standpoint, even if the goal is sustainability, I'd be super nervous if my entire bucket of funding was coming from one source that can one day just say, you know what, never mind. Not that I think the foundation is wrong
100%.
for doing it. I just wonder what the expectations were. But yeah, so I thought that was interesting, and I always thought,
I should chime in.
actually, it kind of surprises me that.
These
Oh, I'm
things
sorry.
aren't
What?
well planned out, right? Like
Yeah,
things like
yeah.
people are like, oh, I want to build an explorer, I want to build a wallet, I want to do this, I want to do that. And at the beginning of an ecosystem, it's like the foundation has a fuck ton of money, things are
Mhm.
good. Like it's just build, 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 build. Like, so nobody's thinking 3 years down the line, how are we gonna pay for this? You know what
Hmm.
I mean? Like that's you see this in a lot of L1s, new L1s. It's not just an Algorand issue. Like the foundation over allocates at the start and then has to cut back, and the cutback is
Right.
really dramatic.
Well, things to think about. Yeah. But I like your idea of retro. Did we get to that yet? The retroactive funding. I think that's really interesting. And the caveat I want to make is that our city does something similar. So, I don't know how many of the audience are familiar with TIF funding, tax incremental finance funding. It's a mechanism that cities can use to basically fund projects where they wouldn't otherwise happen. Our city uses those pretty extensively, but they use what's called reverse TIF. So the developer kind of gets this promise on the front end, but they don't actually get the tax incentives until they finish the project, which kind of ensures the city, doesn't pay a bunch of money to a developer that just folds up, or just doesn't get the job done. And it kind of sounds like your idea is sort of similar to that, and this is sort of the crypto version of that.
Yeah, retroactive like funding kind of even goes a step further,
Hmm.
where they say we're not going to promise you anything, and you need to build the entire project yourself and prove that it is generating value, creating value for the ecosystem, and then the ecosystem will judge the value and pay you for that value, right? Like that's
Hmm.
the kind of idea with retroactive funding is like there's they might have received some funding, maybe they received 100K, right? But then the value perceived from the ecosystem is like a mil, right? So now there's 900K missing that that project did not receive, but the ecosystem thinks it deserves. So that would be a retroactive funding part, like you know grant, or however you want to look at it. uh, but yeah, that's how you should like mentally judge or mentally think about it. It's a lot easier to judge something in the past than in the future, right?
Sure.
It's like think of going to an event. It's like you don't know how the event is going to go before you go to it. It might suck. It could be a 0, it could be a 10. Like the difference there is so great. And when you're talking about like
Hmm.
building complicated applications, there's so many things that could go wrong or be like undetermined at the start that like for every one idea or for every 10 ideas you have, probably one will make it to like execution and finding product market fit and creating value. It's like not an easy thing to do. And so for anyone to think that they could judge these things like before they happen is like naive. And we've seen it so many times. VCs do it all day and get it wrong.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's my take on it. Like retroactive solves a lot of issues. Another issue it solves is you don't have to deal with milestones or deliverables.
Hmm.
And that's actually an interesting discussion going on right now at XGov with deliverables, because there's a grant up or a proposal up right now that the deliverables are not very clear. And so if the deliverables are kind of ambiguous, then it kind of comes down to who is judging the deliverables, which is someone at Algorand Foundation,
Right.
right? So that is a central point, that like a central weak point is, and it's kind of like twofold. This goes back to the more complicated you make something, the more kind of shit can go wrong.
Hmm.
Like now you have somebody at Algorand Foundation who has to be responsible for testing and all, and like checking over all of these milestones and making sure that they're completed and like not done like horribly wrong. So there's so much ambiguity just in that, you know, and then like the whole thing is just very problematic. And I see it coming to a head this period actually, because of this one proposal that the deliverables are not clear. And yeah, it's, I don't know what's going to happen with that, but it wouldn't surprise me if that grant was actually not paid out, you know, because the deliverables are so ambiguous that an argument could be made on each side of it saying, oh, it was completed, no it wasn't, you know.
Well,
But
that's
yeah.
where I think it gets tricky on the back end, because even with that reverse TIF that I was talking about, one of the caveats is usually the developer guarantees like a certain value. So okay, we're going to build this building and it's going to be, you know, we guarantee you it'll be valued at $12 million. And as long as it hits that valuation or higher, you know, then you get the tax payout. But that's like a really easy metric. I would imagine the metrics around what, you know, what value, like if you said, well, what value did Algo Explorer add to the I don't know, 4,400 million algo. I don't know. Like, I'd just be
So
spitballing numbers, right?
let's do like a really rudimentary example. Let's
Sure.
use something that's still alive in the ecosystem. Pick one of your favorite apps from the ecosystem. Just think of one.
All right. Let's just say, well, let's use yours.
No, don't use us.
Okay.
Use
Don't use
some,
me. Okay. I'll do the
something.
other sponsor, Fractal Monsters then.
Yeah. Okay. So Fractal Monsters. Let's say that this XGov period, we're XGovs, and this XGov period, there's 10 million algo to be divvied up, right? And there's, let's just say, I don't know, 100 proposals, all of very varying kind of, you know, degrees of good and bad and whatever. So there's 100 proposals, and you have 10 million votes to allocate. How many of those 10 million votes would you give to just Fractal Monsters?
It was 10 million, you said?
Yep, you have 10 million to vote across all. So if you give Fractal 1 million, now you only have 9 million left, right?
And you said there's 20 proposals?
I said there's 100.
100 proposals.
Yep. But a lot of them are shit, remember. So
Yeah. Gosh, at least 500K, huh? Probably
so
500K
that's,
to $1 million. They're pretty big and they've been growing a lot. They've been doing a lot of work. Not just saying that because they're a sponsor, by the way. They
no,
really are
I
doing.
think that's an accurate assessment. Like
Yeah.
truly, like
Mhm.
and this is a great way to do it, right? Because you're not saying like, oh, like you know, there's a missing funding gap in Fractal Monsters of 500,000 algo. You're saying out of all these proposals and how much I have to allocate, they are worth X, right? And so in your mind, it's so much easier to deal with. Like, so then let's continue with the example. I say I also think they deserve 500,000 algo. And then, you know, let's pretend there's only like a few people in XGov. Somebody else says they deserve 1 million, and then somebody else says they deserve 0. Right? Just a really simple example with 4 votes. This would never actually happen. But so it's 1 million, 500K, 500K, 0. And so you would take the median of those votes, right? Which would be 500K. And that's what they would be allocated.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I think it's a great way to kind of judge value, and not so much the project necessarily being like, oh, we need X, and then people trying to determine if they do really need X. It removes that, right? And then it's you're just looking at how much is it worth to me, and then you take those samples from a bunch of people that are actual experts, right? And then you get pretty good, accurate scores, you know? Yeah, that's the
So,
general gist.
so to kind of cap things off, like I know there were a couple of Algorand Foundation folks in the audience for the spaces when you were running it. You know, do you feel like a lot of the foundation folks are receptive to these ideas, or what do you think is the next step going forward with this?
Yeah, totally. Like they're very receptive, and you know, I think they are trying to find a workable system in like their already designed kind of framework. But
Mhm.
yeah, I just keep pushing for like, let's try and do it even better. Let's try and do it even better. And I'm not trying to like put down what they're doing. You know what I mean? So they're taking the XGov system right now, which is like very broken and everybody knows it, to something that would just be based on if you are staking, and then based on, you know, how many votes you know, you've had. That will determine your voting power in XGov. And so, like, is that an improvement? Certainly, but it's not like enough, you know. So I'm just going to be that annoying person that is just never satisfied until it's like where I can't find anything wrong with it, you know, or I can't think
Right.
until I can stop thinking of the way to improve it, then I will just keep being annoying. And like, I probably do annoy some of them, but I know a lot of the AF members, like, they love people sharing ideas because they don't know everything either, you know. And so that's how you can get like a consensus among the
Mhm.
community, is like people share ideas. Okay, this idea was popular, this idea wasn't, you know, like, let's investigate, you know, the first idea.
Well, John, I think that's why you're a great entrepreneur, because you keep wanting to make it perfect. You know, you just keep wanting to make it better and better until you don't see anything wrong with it. So I like that. If I can
For
just have
sure.
you answer one question from this is from Average Zen. I think he's Governor Zen on Twitter, but he says, "Can we talk about the allegations of quid pro quo XGov whale votes?" I think we kind of touched on that a little bit, but
What do
what
you?
do you think about that?
I would love to know who he's talking about specifically, but I'll assume that he's talking maybe about Foodie and Chris and that discussion that came out,
I remember that.
um, where yeah, there's essentially like you know, a whale, and in this process, and you can just go tap them and kind of collude, or not necessarily even collude, but just ask for support.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think there's like, you know, given the framework, that is going to happen, right? Like that's just a function of how it's set up, is like people have votes, you could figure out who those people are. Like, obviously people are going to talk. um
Mhm.
I think solving that is almost impossible. I think it's kind of part of the politics of the whole thing.
Mhm.
um yeah, like, you know, if you have a really good idea, you should be out there campaigning for it and championing it and asking everybody possible to vote for it. So I personally like don't see necessarily anything wrong with it. The allegations that I did see some people make, that like, you know, are of questionable maybe ethics, are around like Chris voting for things that were specifically for Voy. Like, so that I think is a lot murkier of like a discussion.
Hmm.
And I personally like Chris, so I'm not going to like bash him, but I asked him straight up, like, what happened, and he said, "Look, like, um, when I was participating in XGov, everybody was giving me shit no matter how I voted, so I just
Hmm.
withdrew from XGov." And I think that's like a fair take, you know. Just because he is the leader of the Voy protocol, like, it doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean he needs to be excluded from the Algorand governance protocol. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but it's definitely a fine, murky line of like, okay, well, if you are only voting for things that benefit Voy, then that is probably not good, right? But if you are
Right.
voting for things in the best interest of Algorand as a whole, then like, it kind of matters how you see it, though. If you see
Mhm.
Voy as beneficial for Algorand, then even if it's going towards something for Voy, then you're like, well, that's worthwhile. You know, it's growing the whole pie. But if you don't like Voy, then if you see any of that, it looks like horrible corruption, like
Right.
whatever. So
Yeah, and I know the foundation. Well, at least I know. I asked John Woods about Voy, and he seemed not like really put off by them or anything. I think he said he talks to Chris fairly often, so I don't think there's a ton of animosity. But yeah, it does introduce some interesting ideas. Well, Well, John, hey, appreciate you coming on and talking about XGov. I think this is a good conversation, and if
Yeah,
people really want to go in depth with this, I do recommend checking out his spaces, fisherman.algo, right, on
yep,
Twitter. Yeah, so you want to go check it out. You can find the space, and you know, you can kind of listen like a podcast. So anyway, John, thanks so much for being on. Thanks for sponsoring the channel and everything, and we
yeah,
appreciate it, buddy.
absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, take
Have a good
care.
day. Bye.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching that. I thought that was really interesting. I really enjoyed having him on, and we'll try to do more of those every once in a while. We can get someone on. Average Zen says VRF committee solves this, though, right? Hopefully. So we'll see. You know, we'll see what kind of changes come about with that. And with that, I gotta go. I gotta get back to the day job. But guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks to John for being on the channel. Thanks to our sponsors, Non-Fungible Domains and Fractal Monsters. Appreciate you guys a lot. And also, yeah, if you haven't hit the like and subscribe already, I appreciate that. Average Zen says, good show, BC. I appreciate that, my friend. I appreciate you being here and asking a lot of questions. Sorry I couldn't get all of them on the screen, but we had kind of a short time. And all right, well, that's it for me. Take care, guys. Stay safe out there, and I will see you